The bag wasn't listed in any of the original evidence logs. No photos, no tags, no mention of it anywhere in the final report. Yet there it was, half buried behind an old furnace in the basement of a foreclosed property on the outskirts of Nags Head, North Carolina. It was coated in a film of dust, mold blooming in patches along the straps. Inside, however, the contents were unnervingly specific. A boy's size medium t-shirt, one sock, a small flashlight without batteries, and a sealed Ziploc bag of beach sand. The sand was damp. The property had been abandoned for nearly a decade. Boarded up after foreclosure, it was being cleared by a county worker when the backpack was discovered. He called the police without hesitation, not because he suspected anything criminal, but because of the name scribbled on the tag stitched inside the flap, A. Mallory, age 10. The name was all too familiar to Detective Lorna Price, who took the call that morning. She had been fresh out of academy when the case broke 14 years ago. The unexplained disappearance of Evan Mallory, a 10-year-old boy who vanished from a family outing during Labor Day weekend in 2009. The case had gone cold by 2011, despite statewide searches, dozens of interviews, and a reconstruction effort that spanned months. There had never been a body, never even a shoe print after the first 24 hours. And now, without warning, this artifact from the past emerged, raising questions the department had long since buried. Labor Day weekend, 2009. The Mallory family, parents Tom and Gillian, and their two sons, Evan and Lucas, had rented a beachfront cottage in Kill Devil Hills. It was an off-the-grid kind of week. No TV, no devices, just board games, kites, and shorelines. The weather had been mostly clear, with a warm Atlantic breeze and only the occasional overcast haze. According to the official statement, it was around 5:20 p.m. on Sunday when Gillian noticed Evan wasn't on the blanket anymore. They had been near lifeguard post No. 9, and Tom had taken Lucas to a nearby stall to buy shaved ice. Evan, apparently, had been collecting shells along the tide pool edge. When Gillian stood up and scanned the beach, there was no sign of him. At first, she thought he had wandered off toward the dunes, chasing a bird or looking for crabs. But after 10 minutes of calling, after retracing steps, after asking passers-by, panic began to set in. Witnesses later recalled seeing a boy with a green bucket walking near the dunes around that time. Others claimed they remembered a figure in a red sweatshirt, possibly male, standing alone near the wooden boardwalk. But no camera footage from nearby rental homes or businesses showed Evan leaving the area. His bucket was later found half buried under a drift of sand, some 20 meters from the waterline, as if set down with care. The police responded within the hour. Beach patrol, dogs, helicopters. For 72 hours, the coastline was combed inch by inch. The Mallorys were cooperative, if devastated. Tom, an insurance claims adjuster, barely spoke during questioning. Gillian, a third-grade teacher, wept through every interview. Lucas, only 6 at the time, remembered little. He said Evan had promised to show him a secret shell after lunch. That was all. No sign of a struggle. No footprints apart from family and beachgoers. No signs of abduction. The case stalled. A few irregularities remained on file, though. A call placed from a burner phone to Gillian's number 2 days before the disappearance. A crumpled receipt from a gas station found in Evan's pocket from a town he'd never visited. A vague report from a fisherman who saw a boat anchored unusually close to shore the morning of the incident, but none of it led anywhere. The theories grew wilder by the year. Some said drowning, others insisted on abduction, and a few claimed Evan had run off. Back then, the backpack had never been part of the evidence, though it was supposedly with Evan at the time, packed with a snack, a flashlight, and his shell guide notebook. When questioned, Gillian had said she hadn't seen it after lunch. It had vanished along with her son, and yet now it was here. The location where it was found, 13 miles from the original beach, in a house that hadn't been occupied in over 10 years, deepened the mystery. The house had once belonged to a man named Curtis Lyle, a local handyman who had disappeared under unrelated charges in 2010 and had never resurfaced. While he had no direct connection to the Mallorys, he had worked seasonally at various beach properties and had multiple entries in police reports for trespassing, drunken conduct, and property disputes. When Detective Price opened the bag, it wasn't just the presence of sand or the age of the fabric that struck her, it was the t-shirt, faded blue, with the worn print of a local water park that had closed in 2007. Gillian confirmed, in a later phone call, that it had been Evan's favorite shirt. But it was the flashlight that brought the case back into motion. Forensic technicians discovered partial fingerprints, too smudged for identification, but recent enough to suggest someone had touched it in the last few years. Not from 2009, not from Evan, who had moved the bag. Why hide it, sealed and untouched, in a house no one had entered in years? And why now? The basement held no other evidence. The rest of the house was derelict, graffiti-covered, stripped of copper and fixtures, but the discovery ignited a slow-burning fuse. The case was reopened. The Mallorys were informed. Tom reacted with a rigid silence. Gillian sobbed in disbelief. Lucas, now 20, living in Raleigh, agreed to meet with investigators for a full re-interview. That interview would reveal a detail that had never made it into the original files. A name Evan had whispered to him the night before he disappeared, someone he had supposedly seen near the dunes, watching them. Someone from the house with the cracked window. And that house, unnoticed at the time, was only 2 blocks from the property where the backpack was found. The past, it seemed, had been quietly waiting. And now, it had stirred. Detective Price reopened the case files from 2009, now brittle with age and yellowing at the edges. The original investigation logs held hundreds of pages, interviews, beach surveillance stills, time-stamped call sheets, handwritten notes in fading ink. But Lucas Mallory's recollection, the mention of the house with the cracked window, had never been recorded. He told her that he hadn't thought it meant anything, that at 6 years old he didn't even know how to explain it. But the moment he heard about the backpack, he said that memory returned with unsettling clarity. The house in question had been vacant even back in 2009, a single-story property on Cranberry Lane, known among kids in the area for its broken front window and a sagging porch swing that creaked even without wind. No record had linked it to the Mallorys, but according to property records, it had briefly been rented under a cash-only arrangement by a man named Curtis Lyle in late August of that year. The name matched. Lyle had been known to police in the Outer Banks, a loner with a temper, mostly harmless, but with priors for trespassing and one sealed arrest in 2006 for endangering a minor, later dismissed. He vanished from Nag's Head in 2010, a warrant trailing behind him for unpaid rent and petty theft. He hadn't been seen since. Detective Price requested a full forensic sweep of the Cranberry Lane house, though the odds of physical evidence surviving 14 years were low. Still, a trained team searched the property room by room. It was in the crawl space beneath the house that they uncovered the first tangible lead. The rusted remains of a plastic storage bin, warped by time and moisture, containing old clothing, receipts, and a weathered spiral-bound notebook with juvenile handwriting. Most of the notebook was illegible, pages fused, the ink blurred, but 2 pages in the middle stood out. They were dry, preserved between laminated magazine clippings, a child's hand-drawn map of the beach, and a short list: bring light, don't tell Lucas, stay near the fence, wait for the boat. If no one comes, go to the porch. Forensic handwriting analysts would later confirm the writing likely belonged to Evan Mallory. The implications were disturbing. If the list was genuine, and it appeared so, it suggested intention, A meeting, perhaps a plan made in secret. But for what? And with whom? The team turned their focus to communications. Investigators pulled cell tower records from 2009, limited, due to the tech at the time, but traceable. Evan hadn't had a phone, but Gillian's mobile had received a call 2 days before the disappearance from a prepaid burner. The number had never been traced. This time, Price requested a new triangulation using current technology. The ping placed the call near a fishing supply store off Route 12, less than a mile from the house where the backpack had been found. Further digging into the store's surveillance archives yielded nothing. Tapes from that era were long gone, but records showed that a purchase had been made that morning, a prepaid phone, cash payment. Back in 2009, it hadn't been considered relevant. More disturbing, though, was a police interview from that same week. A beach vendor, Donnie Farrell, had mentioned seeing a man loitering around lifeguard post number 9, mid-40s, sunburned, fishing hat, khakis too short, he had described, kept walking back and forth like he was waiting for someone. No sketch had been drawn, no follow-up was done. The lead was buried under more urgent lines of inquiry. Now, 14 years later, Price had the forensic sketch artist work with Donnie again. The result was a rough rendering, but one that bore resemblance to a younger Curtis Lyle. Suddenly, Lyle moved from a ghost in the background to a central figure. Price tracked his last known movements. DMV records indicated a license renewal in 2009 under a P.O. Box address. A traffic citation from 2010 in Roanoke, Virginia. After that, nothing. No credit, no work history, no tax returns. A man who had slipped beneath the surface and never resurfaced. Meanwhile, the lab completed a trace examination of the backpack. The results were inconclusive on fingerprints, smudged, contaminated, but the flashlight yielded something else. A microscopic blood trace on the rubber seal around the lens. Enough for a partial DNA profile. It was not a match for Evan, nor for the Mallory family. It was incomplete, degraded, but it was male, and it didn't match any entry in the national database. For now, it was stored as unknown male to 34OBX. Detective Price had the evidence sent for advanced testing, hoping for a broader genealogical trace. The analysis would take time. In the interim, she revisited the Mallorys. Tom had aged into a version of himself that was almost unrecognizable from the footage taken in 2009, grey-haired, withdrawn, speaking little. Gillian, on the other hand, still kept a binder of every article ever written about the case. She'd never stopped looking. Price noticed something during their conversation, an old photo on the wall. A beach photo, slightly crooked in the frame. Evan, standing with a bucket in hand, squinting at the camera. Behind him, the dunes. And, barely visible, a man standing near a low fence. She asked for the original. A digital enhancement revealed a blurry figure. The resolution was poor, but the stance, posture, and clothing bore a resemblance to the sketch. Price submitted it to image recognition software, a long shot. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Evan hadn't simply wandered off. More interviews followed. Old witnesses recontacted. Anders, a former maintenance worker at the beach rentals, remembered seeing Lyle doing work under a false name, something Price later verified with old vendor permits. He'd been hired briefly to fix a broken sump pump at a cottage 2 blocks from where the Mallorys had stayed. The same week Evan vanished. Everything pointed back to Curtis Lyle. Yet without a body, without a direct witness or clear forensic match, no warrant could be issued. Lyle remained officially unlocated. Technically, he wasn't even a suspect, only a person of interest. Still, the investigation began to pivot. The FBI was notified. A task force was quietly formed. Then one morning, a brown paper envelope arrived at the precinct. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside, a photo, printed on glossy paper. It showed a pair of boys, one of whom was unmistakably Evan Mallory, standing in what looked like a garage. The photo was undated. In the background, the same cracked window from the Cranberry Lane house. On the back, handwritten in ink, "He was never alone." And just like that, the entire narrative fractured. The photo shifted everything. Not only did it confirm that Evan Mallory had been inside the Cranberry Lane property, but it also suggested the presence of a second boy, unknown, expressionless, eyes half-shadowed beneath a mop of dark hair. The background revealed tools hanging neatly, a dirty tarp rolled into the corner, and a workbench with what appeared to be a Polaroid camera. There were no visible signs of distress in Evan's face, but something in his posture, tight shoulders, hands curled into the hem of his shirt, hinted at discomfort. Detective Price brought the image to the Mallorys. Tom stared at it for over a minute before excusing himself, visibly shaken. Gillian, her voice strained, insisted Evan looked tired but not hurt. Neither recognized the other child. The photo was analyzed immediately. The print was traced to a discontinued drugstore brand of instant camera, common in the late 2000s. The paper itself had been manufactured in 2010, suggesting the image was printed, or at least reprinted, sometime after Evan's disappearance. The ink composition narrowed the time frame further, likely within the last 2 years. But the most pressing question remained: who had sent it? Fingerprint and DNA testing on the envelope and photo yielded nothing. Surveillance footage from the mail drop was inconclusive. The envelope had been slipped into a night deposit box at a courier center with no cameras nearby. A calculated move. The second boy in the image became the task force's focus. Analysts used facial approximation software to generate age-progressed models, while local records were combed for missing boys with similar features from the years surrounding Evan's disappearance. In parallel, investigators dove deeper into Curtis Lyle's background. A new clue emerged from a 2008 lease agreement in Hatteras. Lyle had listed an emergency contact, someone named Owen Baird. The name was unfamiliar, but public records revealed Owen had a juvenile record sealed by the state and had spent time in a halfway facility in 2004. That facility, as it turned out, was in the same county where Lyle had lived at the time. Records from the juvenile center were sparse, but a handwritten intake sheet mentioned something chilling. Lyle, frequent visitor, claims to be uncle. The theory shifted. Had Lyle mentored someone, or had he brought someone with him? Facial comparison software eventually matched the second boy in the photo to a missing persons report from 2006. Darren Wills, age 11, vanished from a trailer park outside of Charleston, South Carolina. His case had received little attention, a suspected runaway, no signs of abduction, and no family pressing for follow-up. Darren had been in the system. His mother, deceased, his father, incarcerated, last seen at a food truck 2 blocks from where Lyle had been working under an alias. The link was undeniable. The working theory was that Lyle had taken Darren years earlier, long before Evan's disappearance, and that Darren had either lived with or assisted Lyle in some unknown capacity. Whether Darren was a victim, an accomplice, or both remained unclear. Detective Price presented this hypothesis to the FBI profiler assigned to the case. His assessment was sobering. It's likely that Darren became both witness and participant, manipulated, perhaps coerced, into silence. If he's alive, he's either hidden or terrified. The case gained traction. Media outlets picked up the story of the backpack, the reopened file, the new photo. Nag's head became the focus of national attention. The Mallory family remained reclusive. Tom avoiding all cameras, Gillian offering a single written statement. "We only want to know what happened. We've waited too long already." The pressure worked. A tip came in from a woman in rural Georgia. She'd seen a man matching Lyle's description a few years back, working odd jobs, staying in a fishing cabin on leased land by the river. He had a teen boy with him, quiet, always looking down. The property, once owned by a man who died in 2017, was now abandoned. The local sheriff assisted the task force in conducting a search. What they found was a structure partially burned, collapsed on one side, swallowed by overgrowth. Inside, behind scorched beams and fallen drywall, was a metal lockbox. It held 3 items: a child's drawing signed E, a wristwatch engraved with "To Evan, Love Mom, 2008", a memory card, old format, wrapped in a dry cloth. The card was rushed to the digital forensics unit. It took hours to reconstruct, but when the files finally loaded, investigators were met with low-quality clips, blurry, silent, time-stamped inconsistently. Most showed mundane images: an empty yard, a flashlight moving across a floor, blurry figures walking through brush. But one clip, 19 seconds long, stopped everyone cold. It showed Evan sitting on the floor of a dim room, whispering something to someone off camera. The audio was broken, but 2 words were clear: "I want home." The video left the room in silence. Even without sound, even through the grainy, deteriorated footage, Evan's fear was unmistakable. His eyes darted to the side, then down, his hands fidgeting nervously. The timestamp on the clip, if accurate, placed it nearly 4 months after his official disappearance. He had been alive, and someone had recorded him. The task force worked around the clock. The forensics team scoured the metadata of the memory card, discovering fragments of a GPS log that corresponded to coordinates deep within the Croatan National Forest, nearly 200 miles south of where Evan disappeared. A search team was dispatched immediately. What they found was nothing more than a collapsed hunting shack, consumed by weather and time. But buried beneath a loose floorboard, they uncovered what would become the case's final piece of material evidence: a cracked Polaroid camera with a single undeveloped photo still inside. Once processed, the image showed Evan and Darren seated at a table with a plastic jug between them, one that had the faded logo of a local grocery chain. The photo was blurry, but their faces were clear. Neither smiled. Darren Wills was now confirmed as a second long-term missing child, reclassified from presumed runaway to probable victim. But he was never found. No trace of Curtis Lyle was recovered either. The working theory was that he had moved frequently between remote properties, using abandoned buildings and fishing cabins, living off-grid and in cash-based exchanges. Investigators suspected he had help, possibly from sympathetic locals or drifters who never knew his real name. The partial DNA profile from the flashlight remained unmatched. It wasn't Lyle's, and it wasn't Darren's. Analysts speculated it might have belonged to an intermediary, someone who assisted or facilitated Lyle's movements. The unknown male, labeled in the file as Subject X, became the final mystery in the reopened case. In November of 2024, a grand jury convened in Dare County. Curtis Lyle was formally charged in absentia with the abduction of Evan Mallory and Darren Wills. A federal warrant was issued. The charges provided a framework for future prosecution should he ever be located. But it was not a resolution. The Mallorys never recovered Evan. No body was found. No confirmed sightings followed. It was as though, after those final images and fragments, he had vanished a second time. At a closed press briefing, Detective Price stood before the microphones with a written statement. Her voice didn't waver. "This case represents the limits of our reach, but not of our responsibility. Evidence suggests Evan Mallory survived for some time after his disappearance. We do not know where he is now, but we have not stopped looking, and we won't." Gillian Mallory refused interviews. She later donated Evan's school belongings, binders, shell guides, drawings to a local children's safety organization. Tom, in his first and only public comment, said simply, 14 years is a long time to hope, but it's longer to forget. As of 2025, the case remains open. Some believe Evan may still be alive, lost in the gaps of geography and time, surviving under a false name or in a hidden community. Others think he was silenced, buried by the very man who stole him. And Darren, his silence, his unknown fate, still lingers like a shadow over every unanswered question. Curtis Lyle was never found. No one ever claimed the photo. And the backpack remains sealed in an evidence locker in Nag's Head, tagged not as closure, but as reminder.